All right, folks. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to everybody. I'm Robin Rudisil, and I'm moderating this Zoom tonight. I'm a member of the Venice Neighborhood Council's Land Use and Planning Committee, and I'm also on the board of the Coastal San Pedro Neighborhood Council. Some of you have heard of this study by the National Park Service that was requested by Congress, and some have not. The Venice Neighborhood Council became aware of the study and sent a letter requesting an extension of the comment period and also requesting a public presentation to the Venice community. And both requests were granted. The comment period has been extended to May 23rd, and we'll talk more about that later. And here we are for the requested public presentation to the committee. Please notice the words on the brochure, quote, "The study will evaluate the potential for inclusion of the Los Angeles coast in the National Park Service system," and so on. There are a number of ways all or parts of the greater LA coast could become affiliated with the National Park Service, as we will learn tonight. I want to kick off tonight's town hall by going over the agenda and introducing our panelists. We're going to start with some remarks by Nicolas Rodriguez, Deputy Chief of Staff for Congressman Ted Lieu. And then we will have a presentation by the National Park Service representatives here tonight, who are Sarah Bodo, Project Manager for the National Park Service in the Denver Service Center Planning Division. And she'll be joined by Eric Frenzel, who is Regional Park Planner supporting planning projects across the Western U.S., and they'll tell us in more detail what their study is all about. Then we'll have a short presentation from Marcia Hanscom from Los Angeles Coast Forever, who will give us some perspective on the history of this effort and why she supports it. And we also have on the panel Sonia Young Jimenez, who serves as Superintendent of Venice Beach and the West Region for the City of LA Department of Rec and Parks, overseeing parks, recreation centers, and public spaces across the west side of LA, and she'll be here for questions and comments. So after the two presentations, then we'll open it up for questions, and I'll be organizing that depending on how many we have. I'll adjust the length, but if you know me, I usually err on the side of giving more. And we want to hear from you, and I know we're going to all learn from each other. So without further ado, I'm going to first ask Nicolas Rodriguez, Deputy Chief of Staff for Congressman Ted Lieu's office, to say hello and give you some background.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Not sure if you can hear me, Robin.
Yes, sounds
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Hi, all. My name is Nicolas Rodriguez. You can call me Nico. I'm Congressman Lieu's Deputy Chief of Staff and District Director. I've been with the Congressman for almost 10 years now. And pleased to be here with members of the Venice community to talk a bit about the study law. As many of you are aware now, or have been aware for some time, since the congressman's been working on this, worked on this study as of the late 2010s when he got into Congress. The congressman was proud to author the Santa Monica Mountain National Recreation Area Boundary Adjustment Study Bill, which now, as a law, authorizes the Department of Interior and the National Park Service to study the feasibility of the existing parks boundaries. As some of you are aware, the National Recreation Area has existed roughly since 1978. And the National Park Service has worked with local and state beaches in the existing boundaries, of the park as it exists currently, to manage and have managed, these beaches have primarily been managed not by the federal government, but by LA County and state agencies even to this day. In essence, the idea of this is to create an opportunity for residents of, not just Congressman Lieu's district, although, certainly much of our areas is the focus of this since we cover so much of coastal LA County, but is to bring together residents and stakeholders to talk a bit about what they like with the local public parks and beaches and areas that would fall under this service area, and in essence get your opinions about whether there are particularly things you might like or not like regarding the idea of expanding the boundaries of the SMMNRA. It's so that we can determine whether or not this is one, something that has public feedback, either on a positive or a negative side. Two, to determine the literal feasibility of whether or not this is actually something that we want to move forward with. We're facing no, not just challenges in terms of preserving public land for recreation and to protect the environment, but we're also facing climate change. Um, and the idea of the law is for the Park Service to talk with you, to those of you who are utilizing public lands, in Western LA County, to get your views, on the idea of expanding the boundaries. People who live near public lands and those that use them have an opportunity to let the Park Service know what you would like to see as we, consider whether or not we want to expand the boundaries of the current existing park to other areas along Santa Monica Bay. So some of the areas you talked about are, some of the coastal areas on the west side and in the South Bay, stretching all the way down to San Pedro. Um, and even inland into areas like Baldwin Hills, which have some local park space, or areas around the Port of LA in San Pedro. So through the public comment periods and listening sessions, residents who go to the beach, who use bike trails, who hike with their pets or family, and many more can make their voices heard. So that we can get I should say, so that the Park Service and the Department of Interior get the fullest range of opinions as it studies, as it works on this study over a 3-year period. And this will hopefully eventually result into a fuller and more robust report with a greater expression of the views of those who either live or utilize these spaces as to whether or not this is feasible. And so, before we consider expanding the area, we need to hear from you all, as to, how you're utilizing these public spaces, what your peer opinions can be heard. And the more that county residents participate and share their views, the better study we can get, at the end of the day. But the idea of this is just very much that. I want to emphasize that because I think there have been some misconceptions out there. This law does not authorize anything other than for the Department of Interior and the Park Service to create a study. That study will come from all of your comments and from all of the comment that have come to stakeholders, get into their report. They will draft that report, and eventually we'll submit it to Congress for review. And if we were to determine at the end of the day that report shows feasibility for expanding this and what it might look like, further authorizing legislation could be considered. But I emphasize that, as some of you might know, there have been questions as to whether or not the federal government is just going to come in and sort of take over areas. Santa Monica Mountain National Recreation Area, as I said, has existed since 1978. In that time, state beaches along Malibu, which have been in that area for roughly that time, have continued to be managed by two entities, the state of California and the county of LA. At no time, has there been a period where the Park Service is kind of coming in and managing and sort of dictating terms in terms of how beaches operate in those areas of Malibu. And so I do want to share that as sort of something for people to keep in mind. And at the end of the day, your concerns, whether they be negative or positive, should be expressed, because at the end of the day, we're not going to get a full report. Congressman Lieu was really honored to support this, this legislation. Right now, the park area currently encompasses about roughly 150,000 acres in LA and Ventura counties and a little bit of the Santa Monica watershed. But the idea of this is to, see whether or not expanding this would allow the watershed to benefit from, available federal scientific and infrastructure resources and enabling better conservation and recreation use. It would also help federal agencies, enter into cooperative agreements to manage the land and carry out improvement projects aimed at connecting trails, building wildlife corridors, and more. most importantly, all of this would be accomplished without affecting private property rights or creating unfunded mandates on either the state or local county or city governments. And really, the idea of this study is that the coastal region stands to benefit tremendously from potentially from increased federal resources to preserve open space for conservation and recreation. And that's a big reason why the congressman has supported it. Additionally, one thing I also want to emphasize is the reason why we're having this meeting here is we heard from a lot of our constituents feeling like, hey, look, we need some more time to submit comments to the Park Service and the Department of Interior, and we need more opportunities to do that. This meeting is a great opportunity really to do that, is to bring you all to the table for you to spread the word to your neighbors and other people you know who utilize these spaces so that they can comment before the end of the comment period. Congressman Lieu wrote a letter requesting the extension of the comment period, which ultimately was granted, and the reason why we're having this here. And that's the idea, is so that we can get as many people with as many comments as possible so that the best product that can come out of this is a report that is as thoughtful and that really focuses on the views and concerns for the people who live in these areas and who utilize these areas. So, that's why we want to hear from you. I myself, as well as Janet Turner, our Deputy District Director, always stand at the ready to always listen to folks here, and we're happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nico. And so Sarah and Eric, I think we're ready for your presentation. So go ahead.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. And thank you so much to the Neighborhood Council for hosting this meeting and for everybody who is here participating today. We really appreciate the additional outreach because this is a vast area with a lot of people. So I would echo Nico's comments about we want to hear from you, and we really appreciate your engagement. So I'll give a short presentation on what the study is. I think it's about 10 to 15 minutes. So I want to leave as much time as possible for our Q&A. But my name's Sarah Bodo, and again, I work for the National Park Service, and I am the project manager for this special resources study. And my colleague Eric is also working closely with me on this project. He won't be presenting, but he will be answering questions when we get to that portion of the meeting. So let's go ahead. Okay. Okay. So first, this is a map of the United States. And in green, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's green lines, green dots, green polygons. Those show the 433 individual units of the national park system. And those can include national parks, national historic sites, national monuments, national lake shores, and others. And the reason I show this is because special resource studies like this one that we are doing are, which are directed by legislation, and this study will provide valuable information to Congress to consider about whether or not to add a new unit to the national park system. So that's really the purpose of this study. All right, so on this slide, what is a special resource study? A little bit more information here. So what we're doing is we're providing Congress with non-binding information about the resource qualities in the area for its consideration. So for Congress's consideration about a national park unit or any other special designation. This study will include an evaluation of criteria that is established through law and policy. And then this study is prepared for the Secretary of Interior, who will then submit the study with the recommendations, any recommendations to Congress for their reference and consideration. And just like Nico said, this study itself does not establish any unit of the national park system. That can only occur through action by Congress or in some cases through action by the president. And it's possible that, Congress or the president would not take action, no matter what the results of this study say. So the study could say, this area meets the criteria or it doesn't meet the criteria. And our leaders could say, no matter what the study says, we want to do this or we want to do this. Okay, so why are we doing this study? Nico talked a little bit about this too. This was directed by legislation introduced by the congressman. Um, so Public Law 117-328 directed the Secretary of Interior to do this special resource study. And then the Department of Interior charged the National Park Service with actually completing the study. So that's what our study team is doing. All right, this slide shows our preliminary study area in red. And the text on the slide in bold is directly from the legislation. So I'll just read that. So the legislation defines the study area as the coastline from, and adjacent areas to the Santa Monica Bay from Will Rogers State Beach to Torrance Beach, including the areas in and around Ballona Creek and the Baldwin Hills and the San Pedro section of the city of Los Angeles, excluding the Port of Los Angeles north of Crescent Avenue. So as you can see from that, there's some real direct language about what is included and not included in our study area. And so that's what our study team is really focused on. I will also say that, there may be some room for uh, a little bit of subjectivity about, what is an adjacent area, for instance. And so that's why we're calling this our preliminary study area. And that's one of the things that we are actually asking from members of the public is to let us know, did we miss something or is there something in our study area that really doesn't make sense? I also want to say that we excluded private property from the study area. And the reasons for that is it's highly unlikely that like urban, neighborhood development would meet the criteria for nationally significant cultural or natural resources. So private property is not included in our study area, but there's plenty of public property that we are looking at in this area. Okay, so the study criteria, we have 4 criteria that we are evaluating the area on, and that comes from legislation as well as National Park Service policy. And a study area is required to meet all 4 of the criteria. And I'll go through these a little bit more on the next slides, but it must contain nationally significant resources. It must be suitable. It must be feasible as part of the NPS system, and it must require direct management by the National Park System. So the first criteria, and I've broken this into 2 slides so we can talk about cultural resources first and natural resources second. But this is all about national significance. So the area must contain nationally significant natural and or cultural resources. For cultural resources, the National Historic Landmark criteria are applied to determine whether a site is nationally significant. And so that includes events, individuals, buildings, or archaeological sites that had a national impact on US history. And they have to have a high level of integrity or they have, for example, be unchanged. And the picture here is an example from a park unit. So it's not part of this study, but at Cabrillo National Monument in the San Diego area, the Point Loma Lighthouse is a National Historic Landmark. It meets those criteria. So that's just an example of something that, would meet the criteria for this significance. Okay, the second part of national significance relates to natural resources. And for natural resources, we have to meet all 4 of the criteria on this slide. So first, it has to be an outstanding example of a particular type of resource. Second, it must possess exceptional value or quality in illustrating or interpreting the natural or cultural themes of our nation's heritage. Third, it offers superlative opportunities for public enjoyment or for scientific study. And then fourth, it retains a high degree of integrity as a true, accurate, and relatively unspoiled example of a resource. So the photo on this slide, again, is another example, and these are the Waco mammoth fossils, and there was a special resource study for that site, and they did meet this criteria, and eventually the area was designated as a national monument. Oops, I think I went too fast. Okay. So let's move on to the second criteria, which is suitability. So this is looking at whether a natural or cultural resource is not already adequately represented in the national park system, or it is not comparably represented and protected for public enjoyment by another land managing entity. So this kind of looks at like redundancy, or is, if you designated this area, would it be redundant with another national park unit or redundant with another place that is managed by another entity? And so that's what we analyze for the suitability criterion. Our third criterion is feasibility. And this involves a pretty thorough analysis for resources that are nationally significant and suitable. We'll really dig into feasibility. So feasibility as a potential national park unit. And so here we look at sufficient size and configuration to ensure the long-term protection of the resource and visitor enjoyment. We also look at, is it capable of efficient administration by the National Park Service at a reasonable cost? And some of the feasibility factors include land ownership, acquisition costs, if any, life cycle maintenance costs, access, like is visitor access feasible or possible or present, threats to the resource, and then any staffing or development requirements that we want to look into and be knowledgeable about. All right, the fourth and final criterion is the need for National Park Service management. And so this states that a study area must demonstrate or require direct National Park Service management that is clearly superior to other management approaches. So in a case where a site is already well managed, maintained, interpreted, and open for public visitation, and the current management entity is essentially doing everything that the National Park Service would do, and would continue to do so for the foreseeable future, a site might not meet this criterion. Alternatively, if the analysis finds that there's something that the National Park Service could do that would enhance the current function of the site for its long-term historic preservation or public access or interpretation or education, this criterion could be met. So those are the four criteria. And as you can see, these are designed to ensure that the National Park System includes only the most outstanding examples of the nation's natural and cultural resources. And then the criteria also recognize that there are other management alternatives for preserving our nation's outstanding resources. Okay, I also want to provide some information about the range of park unit management, because if an area meets all four of the criteria, we start to look at, what are some management options? And so I have three main examples here. On the left, we have 100% National Park Service ownership. So in that case, the National Park Service is fully responsible for all park functions, management, maintenance, operations, programs. Partner organizations may support the park, but have no management responsibility. And this is most national park units, especially the older national park units. But the other two systems, I think, are becoming more and more common, and probably would be much more likely in the case of the LA coastal area. We can't really say for sure because only legislation would tell us what to do. But and maybe Nico would speak more to that later if there's a question about it. But in the middle on the bottom, we have jointly managed partnership parks. And that's where the National Park Service and an authorized partner or partners share responsibilities for ownership, management, maintenance, or operations. And these are via formal agreements. And this obviously varies widely by park unit. And then our final range of park unit management on the far right is National Park Service management without ownership. And so in this case, and there are national park units like this where the NPS does not own, administer, or maintain property within a park boundary. And in some examples, the NPS might have a leased facility via agreement for park operations. And often these types of parks really coordinate on like interpretive programming and work together to, tell those stories about our nation's significant resources. All right, so here's our timeline. So this project really started last year with data gathering. Now we are in our public engagement period. After that, we will analyze all the public comments we receive. And then this summer and fall, we will really be doing our analysis of the criteria and preparing the study report. And then we anticipate finalizing the study early next year, early 2027. And at that point, we'll submit it to the Secretary of Interior. The next step would be to submit the study to Congress. And I put TBD in here because there really is, we don't have control over that timeline. So there's no defined timeline for when that would happen. And then also the study will be made publicly available after congressional submission. All right. So if you go to our website and you see the place to comment, we have 5 questions that we're asking. You know, we welcome any input, but to focus your input, these are the 5 questions that we're really seeking your feedback on. So the first 2 are very similar. The first one is, what are the nationally significant cultural resources in the study area that should be managed and protected by the National Park Service? And the second question is the same question, but just asks about the natural resources, because those are our two categories for national significance that we'll be evaluating. Our third question is, what role, if any, would you like the National Park Service to serve in the management of resources in the study area? And this one I think is really, really critical. You know, where we want to hear from folks, what do you envision this to be like? When I talked about some of the partnership options, you know, we want to hear from you. That's really going to help us inform our study. And fourth, what concerns do you have that the National Park Service should be aware of or address in the study process? And so we've already had folks telling us about some of the threats that they see, some of the opportunities, and just really trying to make us aware of things going on in the area that would be beneficial for the study. And then do you have any other comments you'd like to share with us? Okay, this is my last slide, and this is just how to submit your feedback. Please do so on the website if at all possible. And it is, there are like a few clicks you have to go through. You have to like click on the newsletter and then click go to comment. And I can actually, maybe I could paste that in the chat, that direct link after I present. But we also, you know, you're welcome to send us a mail as well. And the address is right here. And our comment period is open now through May 23rd. So we really appreciate your input. And that's it.
That was excellent, Sarah. Thank you. And I don't think we have a chat option here. So
Okay.
you guys should copy that down, or it is on the flyer also, and it's clickable from the flyer.
There is a
So-
Q&A and someone's already asked a question there.
Oh, yeah. And are these slides available online? Yes, they are also available on the website that I have on this slide. And I think it's a little bit longer version of it. So it was actually the version that I used for previous public meetings. But I think you have to click on documents and then you'll see like February public presentation. And we
Great.
also have, oh, I'm sorry, we also have recordings of the 2 public meetings that we held in February and March, and those are available. Those links are available on the homepage of the website.
And we will have a recording of tonight's town hall as well. We'll post it on the Venice Neighborhood Council website. But well, that was excellent. I have several questions, but we're not going to get to the questions just yet. First, we have Marcia Hanscom, and has a short presentation for us with a little more background and her thoughts about this process. So, Marcia, go ahead and can you share? Yeah, there we go. Take it away. You're frozen, possibly, but we cannot hear you.
Oh,
Oh, I might have clicked ask to unmute the same time you unmuted. So
there we go. Are we okay?
now we're good.
Great.
Okay,
Thank
go
you
ahead.
so much. And thanks so much to the Venice Neighborhood Council, to the National Park Service for agreeing to put this on, and for really appreciate our Congressmember Ted Lieu's office being here, and thanks so much to him for all he's done to get this moving. And just so everybody knows, there's a little bit of a change. I mean, originally, I think this was going to be an extension of the boundary of the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. But as you saw, the final wording that got put in, and I think it had something to do with some of the top people at the National Park Service deciding that this might be better to be studied as a separate unit. Of course, all the recommendations could be changed by the time this report comes out. But I think now we're talking about a possible unit of the National Park Service along the Los Angeles coast. And so a number of people who are advocates of our coastal protection here started this coalition called Los Angeles Coast Forever. And we are advocating that we would love to have the presence of the National Park Service here. And I want to just tell you a few reasons why. And let's see, can I not? There we go. So the question is, how would our community benefit? And first, I'd like to just say how much I and a number of people in this coalition just love the National Park Service. And why do we love it so much? Because it's distinguished from other public lands agencies by a law called the National Park Service Organic Act of 1916. And that law has this amazing sentence in it, or a partial sentence, and it was to say that the new agency, that was when the National Park Service was created, the new agency's mission as managers of national parks and monuments was clearly stated, quote, to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. And what I have learned in studying the National Park Service is that the people that work there have just sort of got that part of that sentence totally ingrained in them. And they really do take those things seriously. They don't have what's called in federal speak multiple use. In other words, they don't also allow oil drilling and resource extraction. And for the most part, there's a couple of exceptions, but most of them have been phased out. Unfortunately, and this is a question I have for our National Park Service people here, and maybe they'll be able to answer it. I just read a very scary article last week that said that our current federal administration is asking the National Park Service to start allowing hunting in all of our national parks. And that is just unacceptable for the public. And I know that there will be a huge outcry over that. But would love to hear, I don't know how much the staff here is able to say about that. But the question is, how would our community benefit? And the answer is, in so many ways. One is funding. Each of the three congressional members representing the area that are in the boundaries that you saw on the map earlier, that includes Representative Ted Lieu, Representative Sidney Kamla-Gordov, who represents the Baldwin Hills in the eastern part of Ballona Creek, and Representative Nanette Barragan, who represents the San Pedro area. They can and they will bring home federal dollars to help support the mission that we just talked about: historic preservation, wildlife conservation, visitor signage, and more things that that have benefited the Santa Monica Mountains in the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. For instance, you may have seen a couple of years ago when Ted Lieu included in one of the funding measures a significant amount of money that went toward the Mountain Lion bridge, that is the wildlife bridge going over the 101 freeway. And sometimes and this is another question I have because I do see that there is, I heard Sarah say that there would not be any private lands, but there are some private lands along Ballona Creek, near Ballona Creek, that could be acquired and should be acquired. And they're on the state 30 by 30 list, which says we should acquire those. And having state money and federal money together often is a very, very attractive thing for agencies that are managing our resources. Another thing that's really a big benefit to us is expertise. We've all learned about our mountain lions here because of the National Park Service. They have professionals that help make decisions. They have done scientific analysis. When I lived in Malibu, I can tell you 25 years ago, we thought there were only about 5 or 6 mountain lions left in the area. Now it turns out we know there are dozens, but we didn't know that until the National Park Service started doing really serious scientific study of that species. And that has helped the entire region get more comfortable with living with wildlife around us and understanding how we can kind of be, living together here. A ranger presence is also really, really important. Rangers are taught not just what are the rules of the area, but they're taught about nature and often are some of the best teachers to give our not just residents, but also visitors interpretation and it helps people understand why we need to why you can't go in this area because the California least tern, the endangered species on our Venice beach, it comes all the way from Guatemala and southern Mexico every year to lay eggs and to have its young, and then it goes back. But it comes here every year, and having a ranger presence that could explain that to people of why you can't go in that particular part of the beach, but you can go everywhere else, and helping people as I say here, learn to cherish what we cherish. And education. Sometimes interpretive and wayfinding signage is so helpful to residents and also to visitors. And we have a big visitor area here. A lot of people don't realize this, but Venice, the Venice beach area is visited by more people than even Disneyland. So we have a huge attraction here in Southern California, and yet the natural areas are not well known to people. So, in this area of Venice, Playa del Rey, we have lagoons, we have canals, we have tidal waters that go all the way through areas like the Venice canals, and also the historical Ballona wetlands in all these lagoons. And right now, they're managed by city operations that are not always qualified or supported properly with expertise. For instance, the Grand Canal and Ballona Lagoon Marine Preserve, that is managed by Los Angeles City Street Services. And that's because at one time there were streets going through that area. And the street services people really don't have the expertise or science to help protect the area as well. So this might be an area where the city and the National Park Service could have a nice cooperative management. Also, there's the wildlife protection and expertise. We've had, as many people know, problems with our sea lions and seals in the area with various sicknesses. And we have a really great wildlife rehabilitation area, but perhaps the National Park Service could augment that and take care of things in an even better way. We also have cultural locations that are on the National Register of Historic Places, which is overseen by the National Register is overseen by the National Park Service. And there are craftspeople who can help these historic places to make sure that they remain on the register, and you're not supposed to change the facade, for instance, of the windows or the doors, and it can be very expensive to upkeep those. So sometimes National Park Service funding can go to help our National Register places. And this Venice Beach House, many people don't even know it's there. It's used as a bed and breakfast now. And it's this beautiful place that's just right on a little side street that you would barely know. And of course, the culture of this entire area is very rich. Oakwood, Abbott Kinney, Howard Hughes, so much more. And so the question, we've been asking our communities in various places is, what does your community want to ask for to be included in the study? Maybe the Venice Pier, maybe places like the Lee's Turn Preserve here. You see the babies and the parents sitting on the eggs there on the Venice Beach. Maybe beach and offshore waters. Toes Beach Dunes in Playa del Rey, for instance, has had numerous development potentials in the past, in the community, and the local city council person has fought them off numerous times. And that's an area, for instance, that even though it's a private land, it really should be included and maybe could be added to whatever national park unit. So what else is the question for you? And that's all I'd like to say.
That was excellent, Marcia. Thank you. And I hope you'll still stay on for questions. Sonia, you may not have anything to add, but is there anything you wanted to say before we move to questions? Sonia is the superintendent of I believe, the West Division of our City Rec and Parks. And hi.
Yeah, hi. No, nothing to add. Thank you. Very informative. And I look forward to looking at the study as well. But I'm happy to be here if you have any questions.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'm really glad you're here. All right. Well, I'm gonna, there's a couple questions. I'm just gonna kick it off by asking one, and then we'll get to the hands raised. As Sarah was speaking, I was trying to imagine what's the difference between being a unit of the national park system versus another special designation, and I'm not sure exactly what the possibilities are there. And if there are any examples of other beaches or boardwalks, I know there's a lot more here than that, but I'm just thinking of Venice for the moment. Are there any other examples where those are in a national park system?
Yeah, maybe I can start with the question about the units, and then maybe I'll pass it over to Eric for some examples.
Okay.
Okay, so first of all, and you probably know this, but when we say a unit of the national park system, that is, those are those 433 units, and they can be a national park, they can be a national seashore, they could be a national recreation area. Those are all managed per the Organic Act that Marcia mentioned and per National Park Service law and policy. There are other affiliations like that are not units of the national park system, but there is some affiliation with them. And I'd say like one would be like a national heritage area. Those are locally managed and coordinated entities that do get some technical assistance from the national park system. There is information online about different types of affiliated areas with the national park system. I think there's a few others are not coming to mind right now, but hopefully that answers the gist of your question.
Okay. And Eric, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. I would say, there's a lot of different names that kind of go or associate with park units. Those used to have a lot more meaning. Our National Park Service management policies actually used to sort of be broken out into different categories by what kind of park unit is. Now we just have one single set of management policies for all park units. And the places where the kind of differences are often spelled out and how those are managed is in the enabling legislation. So it's great to have Nicholas here, since so much of that is really dependent on, how it's added to the park system and what kinds of authorities and mandates are in that enabling legislation. In terms of other coastal areas, we have a lot of them in the Park Service. Just here in California, we have Golden Gate National Recreation Area to the north. Close to home, you have Santa Monica Mountains, another rec area. And then Point Reyes National Seashore north of the Bay Area there. So there's several. I don't know offhand of any peers. Might be a question of scale. There's certainly some small docks and things like that. And if that's a question that's of interest, we could, I'm sure, go and do our homework and come back with some answers.
I would love that. I would love to know some other examples that kind of helps me visualize how it would work here. Okay, great. Thank you. And so I'm going to go now to our hands raised. iPhone 9, you should be able to ask your question. iPhone 9?
Oh, that's me. Sorry. This is Lydia Ponce. Good evening, relatives. I am really concerned about this because we need to defend, honor, and protect our coastal areas. And I don't know or see how any of this meaningful work will thwart any efforts from the White House administration from drill, baby, drill. All the best intentions, I don't see anything or any one of you speaking or even a presenter as indigenous from the coastal zone of Los Angeles, let alone California. I'm greatly disappointed, and I cannot support this unless I know that there is the representation, meaningful representation, to steward the land and to help manage the land. There's no one better. Chumash, Tataviam, Hachiman, Tongva, Kish, you name it. They're here. And I don't think it's that difficult to find them. And I am totally against this until everything's spelled out with the constituted state EJ and coastal zone environmental protection, which is consultation for tribes and tribal consent. They're both two different things and they need to coexist on paper, and we need to do better in being relatives. There's no one else better to represent and to have meaningful dialogue with for the people who have been here thousands of years before. I do not trust this administration in the White House, and none of this beautiful language and beautiful hopes and words. I'm sorry, not sorry. You're going to have to do better than this. I know this is probably the preliminary, I think the second presentation. I don't believe that there should be any private property within the coastal zone. It should be all public. So we should take a look at that. And yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. I want to close with I'm looking forward to these improvements because not one of you are indigenous and not representing our coastal area local tribal peoples. Thank you.
Great comment, Lydia. And I don't know who might want to take a stab at that and the
Well,
drill, baby drill comment, and et cetera. But
yeah, I mean, I can take a poke at that.
Okay.
So, I want to emphasize something. The congressman is a founding member of the California Coastal Caucus. The congressman is firmly opposed and supports all prohibition of any drilling along California's coastline. There is nothing in this law that authorizes anything other than a study. And I want to go back to that answer again to you all to emphasize this. I think folks have a misunderstanding, and that's fine. Obviously people are getting familiar with this, but this is very much I think a situation where I think folks are perhaps putting the cart before the horse. This is why we're having this meeting. Is we need to have more voices, and from a diverse variety of communities. And certainly we do have indigenous communities in these impacted areas. And we have worked with some of those tribes in the past on public lands work. But again, I want to emphasize this. This is why you should be voicing your concerns about what you do and do not want to see, is because any authorizing legislation, as I mentioned before, and I think that Sarah mentioned as well, because this has to take an act of Congress to authorize an expansion. It has to be thoughtful. It has to come with feedback from the people that would potentially be impacted by this so that we get a better understanding of whether or not this is or is not feasible and what exactly might be feasible, may be wanted or not wanted if authorizing legislation were to be written by Congressman Lieu.
Nico,
Yeah.
will there be a tribal consultation? Um,
Yes, I mean, the key thing for us is trying to reach out to folks. So whether that's uh one of the a variety of the groups, obviously the Gabrielino, Tongva, and a number of others are in the area. There aren't necessarily constituted tribes, particularly in that are particularly in our district. We have been in contact with a couple of the tribes before. We certainly can continue to reach out. It is important for you all as well to sort of help amplify this so that we can spread it out, because yes, it is very much important that we get folks, including the indigenous community in LA County, speaking and providing context there.
okay.
But
And
part of that is spreading the word. Yeah.
excuse me, my understanding is that, and this is actually a frustration to many of us in the public, but my understanding is that it has to be, because of the way the government laws work, it has to be government to government. So I believe the National Park Service has already done some outreach, and maybe they can talk about that. We've certainly given numerous names of people who are part of various tribal areas, and I believe they have done some outreach to them. And in terms of this administration, which they probably can't talk about, but I'm happy to talk about. And that is that this is going to take some time. And I would like to see the National Park Service do such a thorough study that they do not send it to Congress next year, but maybe the year after, or because we do not have a federal administration who is friendly to our public lands or to the mission of the National Park Service, quite honestly. But regardless, it will take some time before Congress decides to take any action. I think
Yeah.
Nico said that very well.
Yeah.
But I would like to hear more about the National Park Service outreach to the tribal groups, and it would be great to have them invited in sometimes, because whereas the government to government thing, I get that, but it's also really helpful for the rest of us to hear from the tribal elders and wise ones who know these lands so much better than many of us because of their history. Can they be invited into some of these situations, so it's not just we're over here and they're over there?
Mhm.
Well, Sarah, do you want to add to that real quick before we move on? I saw you nodding your head that you
Yeah,
have already.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe Eric would respond to that
Oh,
question.
either
Yeah,
one.
He's really
it's
done.
fine. We try and we have different kind of aspects of the study we're working on. We have invited 18 different tribal groups to participate. We want to hear from them. That includes the 5 federally recognized tribes and 13 that aren't federally recognized. We know in California that's a lot less of a distinction. We welcome that feedback. We want that feedback. So anything that people can do to try and get the word out or participate in that process, we definitely want that feedback on the study.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that. All right, we're going to move on to the next hand, which is Jane Velez Mitchell. You should be able to ask your question now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And um, that's my screen saver.
Oh,
First of all, I think it's absolutely wonderful that the National Park Service is considering taking over these beaches. I live very close to the mouth of the Bayona Wetlands Ecological Reserve, and I see daily that it is teeming with wildlife. Pelicans, cormorants, white-tailed kites, egrets, the list goes on and on. And indeed, 1,700 species, including threatened and endangered species, have been documented at the Bayona Wetlands Ecological Reserve. And I invite you to go to defendbayonawetlands.org, where there are photographs of these animals. And the biggest threat to the wildlife there is a misguided so-called restoration that is basically a bulldozing project that has been pushed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the gas company that has a giant gas storage facility deep under the wetlands. And they want to upgrade it. And they can't go in there because it's an ecological reserve. So you can almost hear the conversation. Well, if we call it a restoration, then we can get in there and upgrade our crumbling gas storage facility. And this is a estimated $400 million project that would involve heavy machinery, lots of heavy machinery, and hundreds of daily workers for at least a decade. And in this incredibly dense area where there is this one spot of untouched preserve for the wildlife. And it's just I'm so shocked that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is pushing this. So
Jane, we're almost at 2 minutes. Please ask the
yes.
question
So
or make your comment.
My question is, are you going to protect that wildlife? We're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction. We've reduced wildlife biomass, mammal biomass to just 4%. If we wipe out all that wildlife that's there, they have nowhere else to go. Can you
Okay.
help preserve the wildlife? That's what the people in this neighborhood, this entire region want. They want to preserve the wildlife. They want to stop this phony restoration.
All right. Very good. Great question. And who is interested in answering that question?
I could speak to it.
Good.
Thanks, Jane, for your comment. The Bayona Wetlands Ecological Reserve is included in our study area. And we definitely welcome information that you have about some of the threats and some of the, the national significance of the resources there. So we are looking at it, and we have received significant public comment, I'd say, already on the Bayona Wetlands Ecological Reserve. So others are also speaking up about that.
Great. And there was also a question in the Q&A. I think the answer is yes. It says, I think our largest wetland, Bayona Creek wetland, should definitely be included in such a park. Has that been considered a possible part of this? Yes. Okay, great. All right. And by the way, I am trying to make sure nobody goes over 2 minutes. So I am timing these for anybody who wants to know. All right. Robin Murez, you are next, and you should be able to speak.
Hi. So I think this sounds like it's very well-meaning, but as people have said, with the current administration, this is absolutely frightening. And the National Park Service is a wonderful division of our government, but they're under siege. You can tell me, here's a question, how many have been laid off since the Trump administration has come in? How many of our national parks are at risk of whether it be drilling or wildlife being hunted in them or oil? Yeah, I mean, it's just horrendous. The news every day. I'm just looking here that the Cultural Landscape Foundation is also suing the Department of Interior because Trump is doing all kinds of things that go against our national landmarks, our cultural heritage. What is it in Philadelphia and elsewhere that his what is it called, DEA programs wanting to eliminate cultural identity and the true history of our peoples is being annihilated. So I think every comment people are making are very important, and maybe this can be stalled out, but it's just really not the time, it seems, to be exploring, to be doing a study of ceding any authority to the national government. That would be really a firm belief I have. But that said, the county does a terrible job of maintaining our beach. Department of Beaches and Harbors, I think, could be vastly improved at radically less cost. And things like building the Venice Oceanarium on the Venice Pier is a fabulous project that seems to not be getting any attention. So,
Robin, you're at 2 minutes, so just sort of wrap it up.
okay, the timing of this is horrendous, but the intent may be nice.
I want to piggyback on Robin's comment. You said something about you look at the current management, how did you say it? Venice Beach is managed between the city and the county, as you know. And so I was curious, how does that factor into the study? And you had said you'd need to conclude that National Park Service management would be clearly superior to what's existing. And even though Robin is suggesting that, the study be delayed or deferred to a future date, I think she's asking, how could we improve on the current management, and how do you evaluate that? Anybody want to take that one?
I guess I could speak to it a little bit. I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we'd like to hear. If Robin or others think that, the National Park Service would be clearly superior, tell us why. That will help us, tell us what's missing, what are the gaps, that will help us with our analysis.
Okay.
I
Very
might
good.
add one other thing. It's kind of come up in another context with other questions we've been asked, but I think it's applicable here of, how would day-to-day management change? And for, say, like Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, the mere inclusion within the boundary of a national park unit doesn't change really the operational reality on the ground for the private lands, the city lands, state parks. Again, it's all very, very dependent on the enabling legislation, but there's also a chance that not much would change. If those lands are within the park boundary but not in park ownership.
Yeah, and I can just quickly say, the fuller study that we get, as well as the feedback we ourselves receive in our office, since Congressman Lieu wrote the legislation which became the law, the study legislation, is if we were to do authorizing legislation, which it is far too early for that. We have not. We're in the midst of the study. Is if authorizing legislation were drafted, say similar to some of you all who are a little bit closer to the San Fernando Valley may be aware of the Rim of the Valley proposal, which is something I worked on when I formerly worked for Senator Boxer and Congressman Schiff. That study was initiated in the 2010s. They are still working on authorizing legislation, which has, I believe, been introduced in a couple of Congresses. So this is a process that isn't necessarily something that is super swift, something that is deliberate and takes time. And the idea is to get its fuller expression so that if authorizing legislation were to be written, that it would heed closer to what is viewed as feasible, but also what is, and quite honestly, the priorities of the communities impacted. That's something we need to hear from folks in comments and elsewhere, and from the folks we're meeting with individually as well, outside of the scope of these listening sessions and these comment sessions.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Helen Fallon, you should be able to speak.
Yes, thank you. I just have a brief comment that I am concerned about how poorly the beaches and harbors has managed some of our cultural resources, particularly our lifeguard tower station, which is definitely historic, and they just didn't take care of it, even though they were leasing it and were supposed to maintain it. The same seems to be the problem with the pier. There's just not, there's graffiti, it's just gets trashed, and no one seems to be able to do anything about that. So, yeah, I understand this is a study, and hopefully it would be, nothing would happen before the politics of this country change. And I think you understand all of us have our level of paranoia here. But yeah, I think if the federal government well, I guess that's my question. Will the federal government be able to provide funding then if they took over maintaining these sections of the beach? Would they then be actively involved in restoring our items, historic buildings, et cetera, like the lifeguard station?
And
yeah.
Helen, just to clarify, beaches and harbors is county?
Yeah, it's the county that well, they leased it. It's a city-owned property, but the county leased it and didn't maintain it. Paid $1 a year rent and apparently never put any money into maintenance. So now we've got this, damaged building, and no one seems to want to take responsibility for fixing it. So I don't know if the feds took over, would this then change the dynamics of how things are funded, or are these just partnerships?
Very good question. Thank you.
I can speak a
Nico
little
or
bit
Sarah?
to that if you'd like.
Sure.
So there's a lot of unknowns with funding, and even when Congress authorizes a new park unit, it typically doesn't even authorize funding at that same time. The national park units request funding from Congress after like some initial steps of establishment. And individual park units compete with each other for funding. And it is true that over time, I think actually I have some stats here, you know, the National Park Service has lost staffing and lost funding, but has also added new units of the national park system. So there is competition. So I wouldn't ever think that, designation of a national park unit would be like this major funding source to solve the vast, vast costs of a lot of this area. Funding could go towards, depending on how if there like this is all if there were a national park unit established and whatever the legislation said about it, if it really was partnership based, there could be opportunities to seek funding for specific projects, related to interpretation or other items. So I'll stop there, and if anyone else wants to add to that
Yeah, I could
discussion.
just touch on this briefly legislatively. So, yeah, I mean, certainly beyond an authorizing piece of legislation, you would have to look. So, some of you may be familiar with the congressional appropriations process, but in essence, the federal government is funded through appropriations bills. Congress has to authorize that funding. Um, Congressman certainly is a supporter of robust funding for both the Department of Interior and the National Park Service in appropriations bills when they come up each year, and you have to do this each year. And certainly, it would be a priority for him, as he looks for more funding for protecting public lands to find financial resources there and certainly support expanded funding in the interior subcommittee bill, because in essence, a couple of agencies or departments are put together in packaged committees for their funding, but supporting additional funding to in essence supplement the work and the money that is already being expended by local and state entities that are already managing this, whether it's LA County or the city of LA or individual smaller cities like say Redondo Beach, El Segundo, Manhattan Beach, or the state of California, is to hopefully provide funding for this. Because the idea, of course, that was fundamental in this when the congressman wrote the legislation is not creating an unfunded mandate. Basically, federal government saying what local folks needed to do and not providing money. That's exactly the opposite of what he wants to accomplish with, at least with the idea, if we were to go forward with this. The idea is to first study this first.
Yep. Very good. Thank you. Before we go to the next question, 1 second, I just want to emphasize the comment period and that it's closing on May 23rd. And Sarah, somebody asked if we could put the website for feedback in the Q&A. Do you have access to that? Sarah, could you type it in?
Yeah, I can try to do that. I'm not sure if
Looks
it'll
like
get
Eric
to.
might be typing it in.
Okay.
I'm seeing like a little thing saying he's right. He's
Oh, I see
typing
it.
at this moment. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I just want to remind people that is, besides, what you're mentioning today, of course, will be documented, but if you'd like to make more specific comments, we have until May 23rd. I believe the link is on the flyer you got to tell you about this town hall, but Sarah is going to also put it in the Q&A. All righty. So with that, we'll go to Roy Vanderhook, and you should be able to speak. Go for it, Roy. There you
Okay,
go. Good.
got it unmuted. Took a couple of clicks. Hi, Robin. Thank
Hi.
you. This is a question that could just require a yes or no answer from Eric and from Sarah, Marcia, and Nico, representing Ted Lieu. I'm going to present a vision, a scenario, and we're going to fast forward to, we've gone past the summer. It's now January. They finished the report. They've submitted it to the Secretary of Interior. And the report is supportive, neutral, or opposed. I'm not sure. But they mentioned something about whales, that are increasing number of whales that have been found of several species, humpback gray whales, blue whales, orca killer whales are all along our LA coast now, from San Pedro to Palos Verdes to Santa Monica Bay. They're increasing, and dolphins too. So in the scenario, they have a mention that there are these marine mammals just offshore, and they're not, the county and the city have no jurisdiction, and the federal government's not doing anything. January's come. The Secretary of Interior has accepted the report that Sarah and Eric have put together, and now the Secretary of Interior gives it to the House of Representatives after January. In January, we learned that the voting results of all the elections, and the House is now, a new Speaker of the House is picked. It's a Democratic majority, and the Senate is tied, or it's a little bit leaning Democrat. That's what all the info is telling us on the polling right now, is that we're going to win the House for sure. Now, this report gets submitted to the House. The Secretary of Interior turns it over to the House. That will then go to a committee. And in that committee, there will members of the House. I don't know who all the members are on that committee, but certainly there will be a Democratic chair of that committee. And that committee chair will then entertain input from the different members of the House. And it goes into a big discussion in the committee. And things can be added that weren't in the report. Things can be in the study. Things can be taken out. They could decide to go 1,000. Ted Lieu might say, I would like the committee to consider 1/4 mile to a half a mile out into the ocean to be in the unit.
Roy, you're at 2 minutes. Roy, you're hit 2 minutes, so go right to the end question, please.
Okay, so in that scenario of the whales, we get a mile off, a half a mile off, like on some of our Channel Islands National Park and Redwood National Park and Rio National Monument have distances out into the ocean. The Santa Monica Mountains doesn't. The question is, yes, could that scenario come to where it goes into the committee? The Trump doesn't have any control over the committee. We get a discussion, and then that probably will take a year or two or more for that committee. And by then we will have a new election for president, and we then will see what happens.
Okay, I think Nico understands the question. Nico, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the short of it is this: I can't really answer a hypothetical. I can only sort of deal with sort of absolutes. Now, I will say I can point. There are, past expansion, like national park expansion, authorizing pieces of legislation which have taken many years after introduction of authorizing legislation to actually get passed. I mean, a good example of it is Rim of the Valley, which I'm familiar with, that encompasses a lot of the San Fernando Valley, Griffith Park, the Vertigo Mountains, the Santa Susana Mountains into Ventura County. That I believe was introduced at least 3 or 4 Congresses ago, and it still is not law. I believe that there was a similar expansion that happened, I think, in the 90s. That was expanded for, I think, coastal areas in like Humboldt and maybe in Del Norte counties, maybe by President Clinton and that administration after years of introduction. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's really a clear answer. There are any number of scenarios that can certainly happen in terms of what the makeup of Congress is come next year and how that might impact the legislative process. But what those will be is undetermined until we find out come, the end of this year, and ultimately what members are sworn in on January the 3rd of 2027, which is always the day that new members are sworn in.
So is the answer yes, it could change? Yes, it could take longer. I mean, it's sort of.
Yeah, it could take longer. It certainly could take longer. We don't know. I mean, again, there's no process is the same. I will say that in terms of studying something, expanding something, I think it also is, it's quite early. I mean, again, we still, we're gathering comments now. The NPS and Interior have not been able to not drafted the report yet. We haven't gotten it. We haven't read it. We haven't thoroughly digested it. You all have not read that and not digested it as well, and maybe had follow-ups with your members of Congress or your U.S. senators. So we just don't know. Well, we're gonna see. That's what we're gonna see. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. It's 7:20. We have three more questions. We're gonna take these last three. And Annie, Eliza, go ahead, please.
Hi, yes. How are you today? Thank you for doing this meeting. Appreciate it. I will reemphasize again in regards to what was said by everyone, from being a sacred indigenous land to the 1,700 species that live in the Bayona wetlands. And we do not need another Aliso Viejo nightmare to happen. We need you to protect. We urge you, need you, and we love what you do, how you protect the national forests, and please take Bayona under your wings. However, with this administration, opportunistic and destructive, anything new they learn, they are ready to destroy. Just like Marsha and Jane, they said that please do the reports, do all the collecting of data, but maybe do not let them be informed, because we really would love to see you protect these lands, protect these species. The more natural land we have, the more chance we have of having healthier planet for all of us. The more we protect the wildlife, the more we protect the environment. And you do such an amazing job. We'd love to see you, and we love Ted Lieu too. And you guys are amazing. So thank you so much for giving us this opportunity and wanting to hear us. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie, very much. I don't know if that requires a response. It was, I think, a compliment and encouragement. And
I could ask a question. The question is, would you be able to protect Bayona wetlands and be able to hold off from this administration all these reports to protect Bayona and all the indigenous lands you're protecting and all the wildlife? Would you be able to do that?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
yeah, I mean, I can just briefly comment. I mean, obviously, the idea of this is to create authorizing legislation, and so we certainly want to hear a fuller expression of sort of the concerns and ideas and things that are top of mind for folks, for both things that they sort of want to see done versus things they don't want to see done, so that we can write, if we were to write authorizing legislation of Congressman Lieu, or that it's reflective of that. So we don't know yet what the legislation could be. If there's a preponderance of certain ideas in this study bill that certainly seem popular, that very well could be something that can influence sort of what is written, et cetera. Certainly offshore drilling, yeah, that is a huge concern for Congressman Lieu. He's opposed it. I mean, he's written legislation, including the increasing penalties for Offshore Polluters Act that I recall we introduced a couple of Congresses ago, which would remove caps on civil penalties for offshore drilling. And after both the Huntington Beach spill in 2021 and the Refugio oil spill in Santa Barbara County in 2015 that actually I worked on for response for Senator Boxer, this is a huge concern. We need to be protecting our offshore waters, our plant life and wildlife and sea life off this off our coast are a critical part of what makes California, coastal Southern California and California so important. We want to protect that. I mean, that's why the congressman co-founded the California Coastal Caucus with his colleagues, from Julia Brownlee, who's our neighbor in Ventura County, and many others all the way up to the northern California Oregon border, is preserving our waters and protecting it, because we need to be doing all that we can do to be the best stewards of the environment that we can be, and to provide resources and protecting and strengthening the Endangered Species Act and other things that can help protect threatened animals, and providing additional resources to help support their growth.
Nico, since you mentioned that, somebody else had asked earlier, could NPS participate in water quality restoration at Venice Beach? We have these issues in certain areas of Santa Monica Bay, like the end of Rose Avenue. Is that something where the National Park Service could add resources or value?
It's a good question. I don't know exactly. I mean, I think the authorizing legislation could certainly talk about certain things, and then of course, if we were to, if Congress were to appropriate additional dollars to the Department of Interior specific for work for MPS, perhaps that is the case. But I don't know jurisdictionally. Sarah, Eric might know better in terms of jurisdictionally, sort of where some of those things might happen in terms of, say, like coastal water quality, because I know that's always a concern, especially
Yeah.
after a storm. We
Yeah.
get runoff, or potentially there's overflow from one of the water reclamation facilities that impacts water quality. I don't know exactly.
Right. Is there a quick answer to that, Sarah or Eric, or no?
Eric,
Oh,
you're on mute. I think you might be
Oh,
trying
Sorry
to
about that. I
respond.
keep double hitting it. I'm not great at this.
okay.
After all these years, you'd think I'd be better, but I don't think there's a quick answer. There are some monitoring programs that the Park Service participates in. There's technical assistance that we can bring in, expertise to address certain problems. There's funding streams that can be available to grants and financial assistance type situations where communities can tap into different funding streams. But I think it's a long answer, basically.
Yeah, and it might even fall under mismanagement. I'm not current situation. I'm not sure, but that's just food for thought. All right, let's go back to our questions. The phone number ending in 885. You are now able to talk. Go ahead, please. 885. Can you unmute?
You
Looks
might
like
have to tell them how to unmute on the phone.
Oh, is it *6 or I don't know.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
So I definitely reiterate Lydia's question and other people's concerns about Indigenous consultation and participation, but I also have should be a pretty straightforward question. I'm wondering about what will be the difference between having a national park as opposed to a state park? Is it only a difference in where the funding comes from, or are there any differences in protections or how the land is managed? Because I know, for example, in Topanga, it's a state park instead of a national park. So is the only difference funding, or is there anything else to it?
Great question. Thank you.
Sure, Sarah and Eric could talk about the nuances of what the national recreation area sort of is, and sort of how it sort of weaves in.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so first of all, I think in large part it depends on land ownership. So if there were a national park unit here and land ownership stayed the same, like we talked about, partnership park, then there would be no changes. The national park system would not affect change on local property owners. So if state parks or if cities or counties owned properties, they would still be managed in the same way by those same regulations and policies of those local organizations. If there were national park ownership, then in large part, I mean, I think the Santa Monica Mountains is like a good example of things like the Coastal Commission Act. Access to the beaches stays the same. The National Park System tries to adheres to local laws and policies. But if there is ownership, then there are, some different laws and policies that apply to lands. As far as like specific examples, though, of how that would change, I think that I don't know that there's a lot of dramatic change there.
Okay. And I'm Andrea. I'm going to get to your question. And we only have a couple minutes left, but you are now able to talk and answer your question.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. You can turn your sound up just a little, please.
Okay, can you hear me now better?
Better.
Okay, thank you. Buenas tardes, good evening. I wanted to second what the previous speaker said in Lydia about consultation and consent. I think they're two different things. They are actually two different things and they need to be evaluated. I'm actually also very concerned about the gas storage facility, which was named the most dangerous by the CCST study, and it's a ticking time bomb. Now, SoCal Gas and DWP want to add hydrogen to that, and that only exacerbates the problem, especially around the Bayona wetland. And I am very close to that facility as well. And I think that we need to make sure that we don't endanger people, especially considering the worst case scenario. Hydrogen is more explosive than gas. And if we have a hydrogen explosion or an ammonia explosion, because usually hydrogen is stored as ammonia, we have two critical facility infrastructure right next to it, which is LAX and the Hyperion treatment plant. If LAX has to shut down for whatever reason, that means economic fallout for us in LA. That also means that if something happened to the Hyperion water sewage treatment plant, that we could all be swimming in each other's sewage, and that would be catastrophic again. So those are two very important critical infrastructure. Also, my question is, what are my representatives doing? My representative Ted Lieu, and I am also very concerned about oil drilling, not only offshore but onshore, and the fact that the oil export ban was put in place by former President Obama. Will Ted Lieu commit to putting the ban up again? Because right now we're just basically exporting oil, making oil even more expensive for people here. And we're not doing enough to change to electric vehicles like we should, and electrification in general. So,
Andrea, you're at 2 minutes. Go ahead and make your final point, please.
So my final point is, can we get the export ban back on, and what are we doing to protect residents here in our district?
Very good. Thank you.
In terms of the export ban, I am not sure. I don't have an answer for it because, to be frank, we haven't seen anything in terms of legislative action. I do know that the congressman has called for a permanent ban on offshore drilling. He did so in 2021, after the Huntington Beach oil spill. And that is something that he has, advocated for. That's one of the key reasons he pushed for the creation of the California Coastal Caucus was twofold: that, as well as protecting marine mammal life and sea life. We have huge fields of DDT that were dumped off of the California coastline, which is impacting sea life in Southern California. Not to mention, of course, the impacts of oil drilling off the coast impacting sea life, whether that's the Huntington Beach spill or the Refugio oil spill or the Santa Barbara spill from the 60s, which have had devastating impacts on wildlife off the coast. So I can speak to the fact that he's talked very specifically and advocated for a permanent ban on offshore drilling, off the coastline. I can't speak to specifically the export ban, but feel free to contact our office and share any legislative ideas. Janet Turner, who goes to the Venice Neighborhood Council meetings, every month, you can certainly relay stuff to her. Or call our office, and we can certainly pass on legislative requests. But I will speak to the fact that the congressman has been pretty vocal in terms of his opposition to offshore drilling.
Thank you. And panel, we have a couple Q&A real quick, if you don't mind staying a couple extra minutes. David Turnbull is asking, where can we find a plan that shows the full extent of the study area, thinking about the distance offshore just raised as an issue for shoreline protection, as well as the restoration of conditions affecting biodiversity and wave conditions, surf, etc., the extent inland, including areas, wetlands, lagoons, canals. So where can we find a plan that shows the full extent of the study area?
So on the project website, when you get to the open for comment, the newsletter that shows the map of the study area, Currently, offshore areas are not in our preliminary boundary. If that is of interest and there are reasons why you think that, would meet the criteria of nationally significance and meet the legislation, let us know. So we welcome input on that.
Okay. And then lastly, Robin Murez is wondering how many employees have been fired by the current administration, any parks stripped of cultural history and or threatened otherwise by the current administration.
I think that's outside the scope of this conversation.
Okay, that's the politics. And then lastly, historic architectural landmarks of Venice are neglected and threatened. This is input. This includes the Windward Colonnade, the Venice Lifeguard Station, the pagodas, the Grand Canal, and Trolley Car Bridge. Would the National Park Service assist in protecting and preserving our city and state designated historic cultural monuments and historic districts, which are now not being protected and preserved, is the question.
Okay, so currently the area of Venice, other than the coastline, is not included in our preliminary study area. And that boundary goes up to kind of that first block of urban development, so really covers mostly the beach. If these are areas that you think we should consider in the study, like please let us know. And then there, it's so hard to answer these questions at this point in time because if there is legislation that would state a lot more about what, would be possible. And so I think what's most valuable is for you to tell us what you would like to see and how you would like management to be.
And I have a follow-up question to that. Does that mean, because I've heard Nico say that his office, will be watching to get comments into them. Will you be sharing all the comments with his office as well so that, or do they have to wait till you get the full report?
Yeah, we send everything all at once with the full report, and we summarize, the breadth and depth of those comments that we've received.
So if people really have a burning passion, they might want to copy the Congress member's office just so they know how important it is to them.
Very good point.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you're always welcome to, send stuff to us. But eventually, we're going to get everything. Just as said, I mean, that's literally the law itself literally says, that the Secretary of the Interior will deliver a report. Yeah.
All right. Well, just in closing, if you could tell us once again how to comment. The deadline is May 23rd. Do you have one of those slides to put up that has that URL for commenting? That would be great.
Sure.
This is our chance to ask more questions, to provide input, to ask about areas even beyond the currently defined study area. Okay, here we go. parkplanning.nps.gov/Los Angeles Coastal. And I'm going to leave this up even after we're done here. I'm just going to ask if we can leave this up for a few minutes and let people copy it. But let's see, can I? Well, this will be on the Venice Neighborhood Council website as well. We'll make sure it's very clear how to comment and the deadline of May 23rd.
And this recording will be up there too?
Yes, both. Try to get that done in the next couple of days. There's going to be a second town hall on Wednesday evening, very similar, but different because it'll focus on coastal San Pedro and South Bay cities. So anybody who wants to come and hear about it again or ask more questions, you're certainly invited to that. And that is on the Coastal San Pedro Neighborhood Council website. So panel, thank you so much for your time tonight and answering all these questions. And unless you have anything else to share, we'll see you Wednesday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.